Hello everybody, this is Gregory with Permanent Weight Loss Made Easy, where there should be no hesitation in your weight loss and in your weight maintenance. Today we're going to talk about one of the triggers of poor eating and a thing that jeopardizes your weight loss and or your weight maintenance, which is depression. Now before we begin, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so these episodes come fresh to you. And also if you need help, there is a link to the Clarity account if you want to schedule something. Depression, it's a big one, right? This is one of those cycles. It's like the snake eating the tail. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Because if you're overweight, you're more likely to be depressed. And when you're depressed, you're more likely to engage in self-harm, like eating, drinking too much or whatnot, which then fuels the weight gain and fuels the depression. So it's a major problem, no doubt. One of the cores of this channel is looking at the mirror and being honest with yourself and not to blame others. Victim blaming, it just keeps you stagnated. So many of us were overweight because of something that happened to us in our childhood that threw off our regular homeostasis, to use a medical term, or self-regulation when it comes to eating. So instead of being like the dog or a child who just knows to eat when they're hungry and then they walk away, we didn't walk away. And as a result, we kept eating. And then depending on your age or your generation, like in my generation, growing up in the 80s, obesity was growing, but it wasn't as pervasive. So when I got to elementary school, for example, then I started getting made fun of for the obesity. And instead of, at that age, you're not going to be like, wow, you know what, I'm being made fun of from obesity. I need to stop eating poorly and look and deep dive into my psyche to see why I'm using food for nurturance and stop doing it. No, what do? You just self-loathe, right? Yeah, they're right. And then you just eat to numb the pain, because food, like alcohol, like drugs, like so many things, gives you fleeting pleasure, but then ultimately it just gives you another thing to feel bad about or another monkey on your back when it comes to addictions. So depression is difficult. And we've talked about it here before, how like many times you might be fill in the blank pounds overweight, 40, 60, 100, 120. You're like, how can I start? There's just gigantic Sisyphusian boulder, Sisyphus from Greek mythology pushing the boulder up. Like, how can I even start? And we've talked about how to address that. But let's look at depression. So depression can be triggered by many things. Sure, your childhood trauma that might have led you to become obese, and then all the social stigma that comes with obesity, maybe the rejection, you finding a partner or a spouse, or you being told that you're fat and unattractive, maybe every time you try on clothes. All these things can lead to depression. I'm a horrible person, what can I do? I'm so horrible. And you just get depressed, and you're depressed, you're like, what's the point? Half-gallon ice cream. So what are things that alleviate depression? Well, I would tell you, exercise alleviates depression. There is an endorphin kick. This is one of the many reasons why you should be exercising as often as possible, because like I exercise because it's so ingrained in me. We talked about in the very first episode here, the number one thing you must do is change your paradigm. So whatever you've been doing in the past didn't work. And so if you weren't working out every day, you don't make any excuses not to work out. And one of the reasons I work out is it keeps me off antidepressants. Just the endorphins, the natural endorphins that come from it, especially when you do cardio, the runner's high, whatever you want to call it. It feels good. And even though, let's say maybe you can't run, just walking on a treadmill, you'll get the endorphin kick. And so that helps naturally with depression. We want to look at natural ways to remedy depression. So what are those going to be? The obvious one's going to be eat better. We know that a high sugar, high junk food diet full of the ultra processed foods is going to make it worse. So eat better, easier said than done, right? Get sunlight, vitamin D, exercise daily, communicate with people. We are social creatures. They've talked about how being lonely has shortened your life expectancy as much as smoking cigarettes or drinking. So we are social creatures, and no, social media doesn't count. Gamers, if you're talking to each other on gaming, doesn't count. We need to be around other people. And so one of the things we like to do when we're depressed is just isolate, right? Isolate with food, isolate with TV. We got to stop doing that. So interact with people, eat better, exercise, sleep well, lower your stress. And then one of the more crucial things is get to the core. I think this is a bigger problem with men more than women, is we're kind of in, like we don't communicate our feelings, we don't know how to get in touch with our feelings, but when it comes to this kind of thing, it's really important to get to the root cause of your obesity. And maybe it's a lot of trauma or abuse that happened to you. Maybe not when you were a young kid. Maybe it was when you were in middle school or high school, or maybe you were in shape throughout your adolescence, and then you had something happen to you in your adulthood that made you then turn to food and alcohol. But whatever it is, you need to address it. You need to address it, because if not, it's not going to get any better. And sure, there's going to be times, maybe because you're motivated, you might lose some weight, but you'll probably yo-yo diet, because statistically most people who lose a lot of weight regain it, and we don't want that. So how do you deal with depression? I think the first step is to look and realize that eating or drinking alcohol isn't going to help with the depression. It might help momentarily, but it's not going to help. And so you need coping mechanisms, because with binge eating, like, you know this, like when you're waiting at the drive-thru, so just antsy waiting for them to bring the food, or when you're at the grocery store waiting at the checkout counter, so you're just in a hurry because you just want to shove those donuts in there. Knowing on some level, you tell yourself, actually, this isn't going to help. It's not really going to stymie that impulse. So we've talked about here in past episodes, like, what can you do to fix that? But things need to be addressed, and depression is a major problem. It's human to be depressed here and there. Chronic depression, serious depression, you should get mental health, you should get professional help. We know that the antidepressants have a lot of side effects, so that's why I mentioned that. Unless you have severe depression, if you do, definitely contact somebody right now. But if you have mild depression, let's exhaust all the kind of naturopathic approaches, because they don't have side effects. And if those don't work, along with good talk therapy or talking to people you know, then maybe do the pharmacopoeia approach. But exercise makes a big difference. That's a natural way to alleviate depression with those endorphin highs. And just eating better, sleeping better, all these things will give you momentum, and you're less likely to be depressed. And lastly, if you're on a good roll and then you stumble a little, don't just throw it all away. Get back on the horse. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.